राधा माधव कुंज बिहारी राधा माधव कुंज बिहारी राधा माधव कुंज बिहारी गोपी जना वल्लभ गिरिवरधारी गोपी जना वल्लभ गिरिवरधारी राधा माधव कुंज बिहारी राधा माधव कुंज बिहारी यशोदानंदन व्रज जनरंजन यशोदानंदन व्रज जनरंजन यशोदानंदन व्रज जनरंजन यमुना तीर वनाचारी यमुना तीर वनाचारी राधा माधव कुंज बिहारी जय जय राधा Paramahamsa Parvijagacharya Ashtotar Shata Shri Srimad Srila Abhay Chanaranda Bhakti-Vedanta Swami Maharaj Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai Ananta Koti Vaishnava Vrinda Ki Jai Namacharya Srila Thakur Haridas Ki Jai Prem Se Koho Śrī Kṛṣṇa Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shivasadi Gaur Bhakta Vrinda Ki Jai Shri Shri Radha Krishna Gopa Gopinath Shyam Mukunda Radha Kunda Giri Govardhan Ki Jai Vrindavan Dham Ki Jai Navadip Mayapur Dham Ki Jai Ganga Devi Ki Jai Yamuna Mai Ki Jai Bhakti Devi Ki Jai Tulsi Rani Ki Jai Samaveta Bhakta Vrinda Ki Jai Shri Harinama Sankirtana Ki Jai Grantharaj Srimad Bhagavatam Ki Jai ISKCON BBT Samstapaka Acharya Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai Shri Shri Gaurnithai Ki Jai Shri Śrī Kṛṣṇa and Balarāma Ki Jai Shri Shri Lalita Vishakha Sahita Radha Shyam Sundar Ki Jai Go Premanande. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to Sri Sri Guru and Gauranga. All glories to Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Jaya Jaya Sri Chaitanya Jaya Nityananda Jaya Advaita Chandra Jaya Gaur Bhakta Vrinda Jaya Jaya Sri Chaitanya Jaya Nityananda Jaya Advaita Chandra Jaya Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Jaya Jaya Sri Chaitanya Jaya Nityananda Jaya Advaita Chandra Jaya Gaura Bhakta Vrinda. This is Chaitanya Charitamrita. We're continuing our reading of the first chapter of the Adi Lila, which is dedicated to the spiritual masters. Well, six topics which we will discuss. And this is all part of a long, in effect, it's Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami's commentary on the very first verse of the Chaitanya Charitamrita, which is his first verse of his Mangalacharana. We have what on the board? Which one? 69. Okay. You know what? I'm going to start from text 68 because they're connected very closely. Om Ajnana-timirandhasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Śrī Gurave Namaha Śrī Chaitanya Manobhishtam Sthapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamahyam Dadati Swapadantigam Vandeham Śrī Guroho Śrī Yutapadakamalam Śrī Gurun Vaishnavamscha Śrī Rūpam Sagrajatam Sahagana Raghunatham Vitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadhutam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Śrī Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalita Śrī Vishakhan Vitamscha He Krishna Karuna Sindho Dinabandho Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vrishabhanusute Devi Pranamami Hare Priye Vancha Kalpatarubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhya Evacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Jaya Śrī Kṛṣṇa Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Śrī Advaita Gadadhara Śrīvāsadi Gaur Bhakta Vrinda Harekrishna Harekrishna Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Rama Hare Rama 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 Hare Hare Madgavira Vigopala Swikuryat Kripaya Yadi Taleva Sampaya Pitva Hrishye Priyajanaha. All of you kindly give me your blessings that I can speak something of worth and helpful to anyone's spiritual advancement. Only by mercy can we do anything at all. I'm going to begin with text 68 because although someone covered it last week, it's clearly connected, these verses. Really, it's hard to understand what I'm about to say without refreshing the text in your mind. Dui-rūpe hai bhagavānera prakāśa eketo prakāśa hayarata vilāsa. The personality of Godhead exhibits himself in two kinds of forms, prakāśa and vilāsa. Purport by His Divine Grace. The Supreme Lord expands His personal forms in two primary categories. The prakāśa forms are manifested by Lord Kṛṣṇa for His pastimes, and their features are exactly like His. When Krishna married 16,000 queens in Dvārakā, He did so in 16,000 prakāśa expansions. Similarly, during the rasa dance, He expanded Himself in identical prakāśa forms to dance beside each and every gopī simultaneously. When the Lord manifests His vilāsa expansions, however, they're all somewhat different in their bodily features. Lord Balarāma is the first vilāsa expansion of Lord Kṛṣṇa, and the four-handed Nārāyaṇa forms in Vaikuṇṭha expand from Balarāma. There is no difference between the bodily forms of Śrī Kṛṣṇa and Balarāma, except that their bodily colors are different. Similarly, Śrī Nārāyaṇa in Vaikuṇṭha has 4 hands, whereas Krishna has only 2. The expansions of the Lord who manifest such bodily differences are known as vilāsa-vigrahas. Now for today's reading. Ekai vigraha jadi hai bahu-rūpe, akare to bhedo nahi ekai swarup. Mahishi vivahe jai koi lorash, ihake kohiye Krishna mukhuya prakāśa. When the personality of Godhead expands himself in many forms, all non-different in their features, as Lord Kṛṣṇa did when he married 16,000 queens and when he performed his rāsa dance, such forms of the Lord are called manifested forms, prakāśa-vigrahas. Now, text 71 is a quote. Chitram bataitarekena vapusha yugapat prathak griheshu dviyashta sahasram sriya eka udavahat. It is astounding that Lord Śrī Kṛṣṇa, who is one without a second, expanded himself in 16,000 similar forms to marry 16,000 queens in their respective homes. Purport. This verse is from Srimad Bhagavatam, 10th Canto, chapter 69, text number 2. That's it. One line purport. So, how the Lord expands into his multi-forms, various forms, is elaborated in several books by the Goswamis. Sanatana Goswami's Brihad Bhagavatamritam is one. More than that, I think, is Srila Rupa Goswami's Laghu Bhagavatamritam. These two books have been published by the BBT within recent history. And Srila Jiva Goswami's Shat-sandarbhas, of course, is the ultimate reference for any question we have about Gaudiya Vaishnavism. The definitive answer will be had, and the most comprehensive and final answer will be given by Jiva Goswami. And of course, we have the many primary shastras upon which these Goswamis were basing their statements, because we know from chapter 17, text number 15 of Bhagavad-Gita, and especially Srila Prabhupada's purport to that text, that you can't just say anything off the top of your head about spiritual life. You're not allowed. Whatever we say or whatever we propose about Krishna consciousness and Krishna bhakti, etc., it has to be based on authoritative reference. And the most authoritative of all references will be the Shastra, Shastra Yonitvat, as Vyasadeva has stated in his Brahma Sutra. So the Goswamis, they set this example. Srila Prabhupada also set this example. We also have to set this example. Whatever we say, we have to be prepared to back it up in case somebody questions, because there will always be somebody who questions. No matter what you say, somebody will be there to raise his hand. He's called the Purvapakshi. Purvapakshi means how do you translate this? The first partisan. First one to raise his hand. So, yes, and certain things are certainly controversial, but even if something is not controversial, you can't just take it at face value like that because it's widely accepted. You have to know why it's widely accepted. This is what Srila Prabhupada did. This is why Srila Prabhupada, throughout all of his books, he quotes the same verses over and over and over and over again. That's why we don't like to read his books. It's too repetitive. We get bored. Admit it. But there's a reason for that. There are actually several reasons for that. One reason is that this is purifying. Again, in chapter 17, text 15, this is one of the things that Krishna says about this principle, that one should regularly recite what we've heard, because it purifies everyone. It purifies us, it purifies anyone who hears, it purifies the environment. So many references, we can't go into thousands and thousands of references to support that. But that's one reason Srila Prabhupada does this throughout his purports, all throughout his books. And Srila Prabhupada also quotes the same verses. Really, I mean, how do we know what is a prominent verse of the Srimad Bhagavatam? How do we know? The only way we know is because Prabhupada did this. And the only way anyone else will know is if we also do this. So that's very important as well. The Chaitanya Charitamrita states, the behavior of the Vaishnava is what establishes religious principles. Orthodoxy is not coming directly from Shastra, actually. It's coming through the Shastra for sure, but it's really manifested in the most tangible way in the character of the devotees. Therefore, the devotees have to be very careful and conscientious and educated and surrendered enough that they can actually manifest sadharma within their own behavior. It's very, very important. So Prabhupada set that example throughout his books also. So in this way, Srila Prabhupada inherited what was the orthodox behavior. We call this shishtachara, the behavior of a person who's fully trained. Shishta means somebody who's completely trained. Also we call sadachara. It's the same thing. Tarako pratishtha, shrutoyo vibhinna, na savrishu yasya matam na bhinnam. The Shruti alone appears to be variegated. You can quote anything you want and establish anything you want from the Shastra alone. And therefore we don't depend on Shastra alone, we also depend on Guru Parampara. And I mean, actually, it's just like when you go to college, they won't give you a PhD unless you say something different. Everybody has to have his own brand, isn't it? Especially if you want followers. The attraction for followers has never been as strong as it is in the YouTube era. So everybody wants followers. We're judged on account of how many followers we have. Chaitanya Mahaprabhu said, "Na dhanam, na janam, na sundarim, kavitam, va." I don't want any of this stuff. Actually, are we really there? I have to think about that. Anyway, so one has to say something different in order to be established as a rishi. But the actual truth, dharmasya tattvasya nihitam guhayam. The real truth of religion is hidden within the heart of someone. Whose heart? Mahajana's heart. Mahajano yena gata sapantha. Whatever path the Mahajanas have tread and given as their example for us to emulate, that's the only reason they give that example. It's for us to look back and see, what did they do? Actually, this is in the Manusmriti. It's a principle, religious principle, that if there's any question as to what is dharma in a given time, place, and circumstance, we all know about that, don't we? Time, place, and circumstance, Prabhu. Anything can fly by this argument. But if you are conscientious and educated enough to follow this principle, then not anything goes according to time, place, and principle. Because the dictum there, this is Manusmriti, he says, if there's any question about what is religion in a given time, place, and circumstance, then the default, safest mode of action is to simply follow whatever your predecessors did and understood as being dharma. You just follow that thing, you will never be degraded. You will never fall lower than they were. And you will not deviate the Guru Parampara. Otherwise, it's kind of a free-for-all of ideas. All you have to do is compete for followers, isn't it? And then whoever has the most political clout, he's the one who wins the day. That is not Gaudiya Vaishnava epistemology. That is not pramana. Power and politics decide everything. Money decides everything. Influence decides everything in a mundane sphere. But in Krishna consciousness, Guru, Sadhu, and Shastra decide everything. Krishna decides everything. And there has to be an objective system for judging that as well. So this is it. You follow your predecessors. And this is the point of that verse from Mahabharata that we're quoting. Mahajano yena gata sapantha. We have 12 Mahajanas, and their representatives are also there. But it has to be consistent, not that it changes over time. The principles are consistent. Okay, I don't want to get too far afield, but the point being that our Goswamis wrote these literatures, Lagu Bhagavatamritam, Brihad Bhagavatamritam, Shat Sandarbhas, etc., and they followed this system. They will make an assertion, read Bhakti Rasamrit Sindhu carefully, but Nectar of Devotion, Prabhupada has translated or summarized. Read it carefully, and you see that for every time Rupa Goswami makes a particular claim, he's ready with a quote. Nana Shastra Vichara Naikina Bunau Sadharma Samsthapakau. This is how they did it. We have to do this. Prabhupada said, it's not just something that we quote, but Prabhupada actually meant for us to do this. He said that you memorize the Bhagavad-Gita and speak nothing but that. Or he also said in 1977, when there was another controversy, people were so ignorant in America at that time that they thought this Hare Krishna movement is brainwashing vulnerable young people. And believe it or not, the court case actually made it all the way to the Supreme Court. But by the time you get to the Supreme Court, you've got some pretty intelligent people there, at least at that time. Nowadays, they can't even decide which pronouns to use in self-reference. But in those days, it was much less political. And so they threw the case out of court out. This is ridiculous. They can understand very clearly. But Prabhupada was very firm, and he said, no, don't. All the devotees were very shaking and trembling about this court case. And Prabhupada said, no, this is a wonderful preaching opportunity. You should seize upon it, carpe diem. And you should take my books into the courtroom and put them all on a table, Exhibit A. Here is the Shastra. You can argue that you don't like ISKCON. You can argue that somebody blew it and made a mistake. It happens all the time. But you cannot argue that you do not like Gaudiya Vaishnavism. This is the point. So as long as books are the basis, then Krishna consciousness will remain healthy and it will continue to expand. And ISKCON will be the transcendentally accredited agent of that wonderful efflorescence of Krishna Bhakti in the modern age. Even when everything is so dark, we shouldn't be so distracted or so discouraged or confused by appearances also. These things can be destroyed within a moment. Now it seems, I was talking on the phone last night with someone, he said, it looks like World War III has already started. It certainly does, I will admit it. I mean, there's a couple of people in charge in various countries who are really trying hard to start it. But we shouldn't be so distracted by these things, any more than Srila Prabhupada was intimidated in any way by the Supreme Court of the United States, because he knows Krishna, with a flick of his finger, can dispatch these persons in a second. Or as he wrote to somebody, I think, I got this from Yamuna, that somebody wrote Srila Prabhupada a letter with all their doubts, and Prabhupada said, you say that your path has become filled with obstacles, but with one kick, I can kick out all these obstacles. We have to have this kind of faith. We have to have this kind of faith. When we do, then we will also become as empowered. All right, I don't want to get too much into this, but the point that we're discussing here in this passage is the Lord's multi-forms. As I mentioned, the whole beginning of the Adi Leela, at least, it kind of is a running commentary on these 17 Mangalacharana verses, and today we're still discussing the very first verse. What is that verse? Vande Gurun Isha Bhaktani Shani Shavatarakam Tat Prakāśaṁscha Tat Shaktihi Krishna Chaitanya Sanyakam. The Lord is manifest as Guru. He's manifest as devotees. He's manifest in his different forms of incarnation. He's manifested as his prakāśas, which we're discussing today, and he's manifested as his Shaktis, and finally he's manifested as Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, who is also Swayam Bhagavan. Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is himself Swayam Bhagavan. He's not any kind of incarnation. We should know this. And if we study Laghu Bhagavatamritam especially very carefully, we will know this. All right, so I offer my respectful obeisances unto the spiritual masters, the devotees of the Lord's incarnations, his plenary portions, his energies, and the primeval Lord himself, Śrī Kṛṣṇa Chaitanya. These 6 are the subjects of this chapter in texts 20 through 58, which we've already heard. Krishna Das Kaviraj was explaining the topic of gurus as expansions of Krishna. We should know that the guru is an expansion of Krishna. That's not Mayavad philosophy. He's not Vishnu Tattva, no way. And he should never claim to be. But in an inconceivable way, he is a form of Krishna. And similarly, the devotees as tadiyas, they're not different from Krishna. That was described in texts 59 through 64. We've just heard very briefly about the different kinds of incarnations. Manvantaras, Yugavatars, Leelavatars, Adi, Adi, Adi. That's in text 65 through 67, and now we've already recited text 68. So, through 71 actually is what we're discussing today. And then, so we're talking particularly about prakāśa. The word prakāśa refers to the Lord's many manifestations. In fact, this is how Prabhupada usually translates the word prakāśa, as manifestation. This is discussed from text 68 until text 78. So some other person will also continue this discussion. I'm beginning it. In Madhya Lila, chapter 20, text 165, we heard that Krishna has 3 major categories of forms. Krishna. What are those 3 categories of forms? 3. Swayam Rupa, Tad Ekatma Rupa, and Avesh Rupa. These are the 3 forms. All the incarnations, they expand from these 3. That's Madhya Lila, chapter 20, text 165. And they further, all 3 of them further subdivide as well into subcategories, especially the Tarikatmas. The most numerous forms of the Lord are within this Tarikatma category, which we don't need to explain just now because time is limited. Just like life. Today we're looking at prakāśa, and prakāśa has 2 subdivisions. What are those? Prabhava and Vaibhava. Prabhava means the 2-armed form of Krishna, Swayam Bhagavan, as he appears in Vrindavan. But many, not exactly duplicates. It's only one form, but appears in many manifestations. This is the thing that we can't really wrap our head around this. He's only one Krishna, but he's simultaneously acting in different ways. Nobody else can do this. What's a favorite example? Ras Lila. This is Krishna Das Kaviraj Goswami's example here. We'll hear it. When Krishna expanded into so many thousands of forms to satisfy each and every gopī, and each gopī thought he's only with me. This is Krishna's wonder. So that's Prabhava form of the prakāśa. And Vaibhava prakāśa is the other aspect. This is when it's the same one form, same one Krishna, but he appears differently as many manifestations. So one manifestation, in one form, many manifestations appear to be the same. That's Prabhava prakāśa. And in the Vaibhava prakāśa, that same one form, but he appears in many manifestations which are different in their features. And the example given here is Balarāma in Vraja, or the 4-handed forms that appear elsewhere, Mathuradhish, Dvārakēshvara, ityādi. All right, so in Madhya Lila chapter 20 again, these are the teachings to Rupa Goswami. Text 168, Srila Prabhupada wrote, Mahishi Vivahe, the text is, Mahishi Vivahe Hailo Bahu Vidhamurti Prabhava Prakāśa Ei Shastra Parasiddhi. That means When the Lord married 16,108 wives in Dvārakā, he expanded himself into many forms. These expansions and the expansions at the rasa dance are called prabhava prakāśa. So that's what we're talking about today, prabhava prakāśa, not vaibhava prakāśa, according to the directions of revealed scriptures. Now note this, Krishna Das Kaviraj Goswami is reminding us here, Ei Shastra Parasiddhi. This is well established in the Shastra. So the same principle we've already discussed, he's exemplifying it for us. Now, all this has wide ramifications if you think about it. In his Purport to Adi Lila, chapter 1, text 35, Śrīla Prabhupada explained, Tat prakāśan indicates the direct manifestation of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Nityananda Prabhu, and the initiating spiritual master. The Diksha Guru is another one of these prakāśa forms of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Again, it's not Mayavad, I'll explain. Śrīla Prabhupada usually translates the term prakāśa as manifestation, or as he does in text 44 of this chapter, direct manifestation, or as he translated it in text 32 of this chapter, plenary portion. You can take your pick. Krishna Guru Bhakta Shakti Avatar Prakash Krishna dui-rūpe karen vilāsa. That means that Lord Krishna enjoys by manifesting self as the spiritual masters, the devotees, the diverse energies, the incarnations, and the plenary portions. They're all 6 in one. Although the bona fide spiritual master is most definitely a jivatma and not a Vishnu tattva, generally, unless in special cases. If you are directly instructed by Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, as Rupa Goswami was, then you can say your spiritual master is Vishnu tattva, but in general the spiritual master is not Vishnu tattva, we've already described. Kintu praporya priya eva tasya. He's an expansion, or he's directly the Lord only because he's so dear to the Lord. But he's nonetheless the very sarup of Lord Krishna himself. Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami wants to make this very clear. We've already heard in text 58. Quote, since one cannot visually experience the presence of the Supersoul, he appears before us as a liberated devotee, the Supersoul, external manifestation of Supersoul, who is also God. Such a spiritual master is none other than Krishna himself. These are the words of Krishnadas Kaviraj. And in text 61, similarly, the pure devotees are also described as sarupas of the Lord. For example, Ishvara Sharupa Bhakta Tara Adhishtan Bhaktera Hridaya Krishnera Satata Vishram. A pure devotee is constantly engaged in the loving service of the Lord, is identical with the Lord, who is always seated in his heart. So how do we reconcile this apparently impossible identity of the Lord with his pure devotee, when we also insist that the pure devotees are only jivatmas? Who has an answer? How do we reconcile this? You raising your hand? The answer is that we don't. We don't. Any attempt to fill this identity into our mundane logic is doomed, because it doesn't belong there. It doesn't fit there. We have to simply accept that the inconceivable oneness and difference is the very nature of the absolute truth. Contradiction, I should go so far as to say, is the very nature of the absolute truth. We know this from Bhagavad-Gita chapter 9, right? What does Krishna say in the beginning of chapter 9 about this? I'm in everything, everything's not in me. So he's saying, I'm in everything, I'm not in everything. Everything's in me, everything's not in me. Directly contradiction, logical contradiction. This has more to do with the limitations of logic than it does to do with the limitations of Krishna consciousness philosophy. That's the point. Logic just doesn't work in certain spheres, like the spiritual realm. So, therefore, We hear from Adi Lila 17.308, which is quoting only Mahabharata. Achintya khalu ye bhavanatan starkena yojayet pratibhya prakatibhya paramyatcha tadachintyasya lakshanam. That means anything transcendental to material nature is called inconceivable, whereas arguments are all mundane. Since mundane arguments cannot touch transcendental subject matters, one should not try to understand transcendental subjects through mundane argument. This is the whole point. Prabhupada writes in his purport there. This is not only in Bhishma Parva 5.22, but it's also quoted by Rupa Goswami in Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu 2.5.93. The relevant point for us here is that achintya bheda bheda tattva of one form being 6 forms at the same time, and even among those 6 forms having subdivisions of many more forms, this is an inconceivable thing which we shouldn't try to fit. Like trying to put a square peg in a round hole. That doesn't really, not going to work. So, Jiva Goswami stresses this principle of achintya shakti throughout his Shatsandarbhas. And those, as I said already, the Shatsandarbhas are the definitive last word in Gaudiya Vaishnava philosophy. And that's why Srila Prabhupada often said that without accepting the Lord's inconceivable potency, one really can't have a completely theistic conception of God. People lose faith over this. How can God do this and how can God do that? Like a favorite question, perennial question. How does a God who's all good allow such evil in the world? We've all heard this question. These are the kinds of questions that you can't understand such things. I mean, actually, we have a very understandable answer to that particular question, but there are certain questions, like the one I've raised here. How do you say that the Lord is in 6 forms and many multi-manifestations, and they're also the same as the jivas at the same time? You can't explain this. Shiva Tattva, Guru Tattva, I mean, certain things are just fundamentally inconceivable according to our acharyas. So we have to accept that. This is the essence of theism for us. Maybe when we become very, very elevated, we can have more insights into this, but even Lord Brahma, who's got the most intelligence of all of us, he admits that he's stumped. And he says, all I can do is offer my obeisances. That's all I know. But we have to come to that simple platform. It's a great virtue, actually, to be simple. In the modern day and age, people who are so proud of their whatever few assets they have for a while, they don't like to admit that there's something they can't understand, especially the scientists and physicists. They really have a hard time. They've just got this drive to explain everything. And they're convinced, beyond logic, it would seem, that they can explain everything, but it's not true. It isn't true. There was one Nobel laureate physicist. His name was George Wald. He was back in the 70s and early 80s. I was in Austin, Texas, of all God-forsaken places at that time. But we had a restaurant that was about 1 block away from the campus of the University of Texas at Austin. And George Wald came to give a program there. He became very wise in the maturity of his scientific career. Of all the hard sciences, physics is pretty much the summum bonum. And George Wald was a Nobel laureate physicist, so very highly respected. But he recognized, finally, he was intelligent enough that he could recognize that there's a limit to how much we can go with this. There is a limit. And you've got to step outside the box if you want to know what's really behind everything, because it's hidden to us by design. Certain things are hidden to you, just like they say in the news. If you believe the mainstream media, people don't seem to notice that whatever you get in your news feed is kind of tailored to what your shopping tendencies are. So, there's somebody controlling all this, and the access is controlled, and the amount that we have intelligence is all being controlled by who? These two brothers. And so George Wald, he started chanting Hare Krishna at this time. He opened up his program by chanting Om. But actually he was chanting Hare Krishna already, even at that time. And he was coming to our restaurant and taking prasadam throughout the time that he was there with us. And he brought many of his colleagues with him as well. So anyone really becomes a great jnani, he has to step outside the box and admit the achintya shakti. That's the lesson here, as I see it. And the same lesson was emphasized for Narad Muni. Here we're hearing from the 10th canto, chapter 69, text number 2. Narad Muni was curious to see. He had heard that Krishna married 16,000 wives. How is he getting on with 16,000 wives in Dvārakā? So he wanted to go and see for himself what's going on. And he was astonished. Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami, later on, actually he quotes the same verse twice, here in the Adi Lila, and he quotes it again in Madhya Lila chapter 20, to demonstrate that Narad Muni would not have been astonished if Krishna's personal expansions, as prakāśa prabhav expansions, were just like those that are given by mundane yogis, Ashtanga yogis, who are very expert. You don't find them in Kali Yuga, but if you could find them, they can actually expand themselves into 8 forms, as many as 8 forms. But those 8 forms can only be doing the same thing at the same time in the same place. They cannot be doing different things at the same time in different places. So this is Krishna's unique identity, and it astonished Narad Muni. He really had his rasa experience at that time. And that section of the Bhagavatam is really illustrating in tangible form this principle of the Lord's prakāśa and how it's inconceivable. BBT explains its original context as follows. I'll read the chapter summary. This chapter relates how Narad Muni was amazed to see the household pastimes of Lord Kṛṣṇa and how he offered prayers to the Lord. After killing the demon Dvārakā, Lord Kṛṣṇa had simultaneously married 16,000 maidens, and Sage Narad wanted to observe the Lord's diverse activities in this unique family situation. Nobody can claim to have that kind of situation. Thus he went to Dvārakā. Narad entered one of the 16,000 palaces and saw goddess Rukmini personally rendering menial service to Śrī Kṛṣṇa, despite her being in the company of thousands of maidservants. As soon as Lord Kṛṣṇa noticed Narad, he got up from his bed, he offered obeisances to the sage and seated him upon his own seat. Then the Lord bathed Narad's feet and sprinkled water on his own head. Such was the exemplary behavior of the Lord. We've been talking about exemplary behavior. Even Lord Kṛṣṇa has to set the example for us. Yad yadacharati shreshtas tattarevi tatorjana sayat pramanam kurate. What does it mean? Sayat pramanam kurate. They are the ones who create the pramana. People don't take it that Shastra is pramana. They take it whatever they see in society, and especially the so-called leading people. That's their pramana. Krishna says this in Bhagavad-Gita. You have to think about this. So, after conversing with the Lord for a short while, Narad went to another of his palaces, and there the sage saw Śrī Kṛṣṇa playing at dice with his queen, and Uddhava. Going from there to another palace, he found Lord Kṛṣṇa coddling his infant children. Krishna's maybe 100 and something years old at this time. Good luck if you can have a baby at age 100. In another palace, he saw him preparing to take a bath. In another, performing fire sacrifices. In another palace, he was feeding Brahmins. In another, he was eating the remnants left by the Brahmins. In one palace, Krishna was performing noontime rituals. In another, he was quietly chanting his Gayatri. In another, he was sleeping on his bed. In another, he was consulting ministers. Elsewhere, he was playing water with his female companions. The Lord was giving charity to Brahmins in another place, and he was joking and laughing with his consort in yet another place. And he was meditating on the super soul elsewhere. and he was serving his spiritual masters. In another place, he was arranging for the marriages of his sons and daughters. And somewhere else, he was going out to hunt animals, and elsewhere he was moving about in disguise to find out what the citizens were thinking. This is before we had CCT. Before the Communist Party of China set the world standard in public surveillance. Lord Kṛṣṇa would go out incognito. And Narad was astonished to see all this. So he was thinking, having seen all this, Narad addressed Lord Kṛṣṇa, only because I've served your lotus feet can I understand these varieties of your yoga maya potency, which ordinary living beings, bewildered by illusion, cannot perceive. We've already discussed this. That would be us, in case you haven't guessed. We're ordinary living beings. Of course, we're trying to be Vaishnavas. Some of us may be. It happens. People do become Krishna conscious. But as long as we're influenced by the illusory potency of the Lord, we cannot understand this inconceivable potency. So Narad Muni, therefore, he asked for the benediction that I simply desire to travel all over the three worlds, chanting the glories of your pastimes which purify the three worlds. Lakshmi nivasa madhusudana madhava tvam deva prasida mama buddhi param dadasva yasmaraham kila vibho tava balakenin samvarnaye chasatatam pranipatu purvam. Vilhamangala Thakur prayed likewise. He said, my dear Lord, I pray, Lakshmi Nivasa, these are all names of the Lord, Madhusudana, Madhava, please give me the intelligence to properly describe your childhood pastimes, especially after having surrendered to you. Narad Muni is asking for a similar benediction. Śrī Kṛṣṇa asked Narad not to be confused by his vision of the Lord's transcendental opulences, and he described to him the purposes of his appearances in this world. Then he honored the sage properly according to religious principles. Remember, we've already discussed, how do we know what that is? How does Krishna know what it is? He follows the precedent. And Narad departed, continuously meditating on the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Now, we're kind of out of time. Maybe I should ask for questions here, but let me just summarize Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur's commentary on this passage of the 69th chapter of the 10th canto. Ekona saptatitame Krishno munim adidrisham swasyaikasyapi vapushaha prakāśan. Note the word is there, prakāśan. Pratimandiram. In the 69th chapter, multiple prakash forms of the Lord were manifested in each palace. Ekenaiva vapusha yugaparekasmineva kshane pratak griheshu pratak prachir adyavrata dvayashta sahasra sankhya grihanganeshu udavahat parinitavan chitram vataitariti. Indeed, it's astonishing that Krishna, with only one body, at only one time, married 16,000 queens, each in separate courtyards of separate homes, and each having separate walls, etc., so on and so forth. And again, he points out that persons like Sobhati, they can enjoy only after expanding into separate bodies up to 8 times, but not in one single body. This is the inconceivable part of it. It's only one body, but it's manifesting in 16,108 forms. That's the part that we're never going to get, as long as we're conditioned souls at least. So this is described in the first part of this chapter, and then the rest he describes the situation in Dvārakā. I think maybe we'll stop here, but if anybody has any questions or any comments, we can discuss anything as need be. Yeah, one. Panchagoda Prabhu.
Chaitanya Charitamrita said that you should use your logic and your reason to understand this philosophy of Krishna consciousness. You mentioned something about this beyond our logical reason.
Yes. Well, that's a good point, because we have to fully utilize our intelligence. And only if we fully utilize our intelligence, then we can recognize that our intelligence is not full. This is the point. So yes, you have to tad buddhayas tad atmanas tad nishtas tad parayanaha ityadi. Krishna says, everything you've got. We heard the other day after Mangalarti, no? Whatever energy you have to use it. So we have some buddhi for the time being. Keep this in mind also. Whatever you have, it's only for a while. It won't be there forever. As you age and all your synapses start misfiring and all the nadis and srotas are clogged up with God only knows what you've put through your liver, then who knows? So we won't see things clearly, we won't hear clearly, we won't think clearly, we won't be able to speak clearly, we won't be able to walk properly, we won't be able to balance properly. How long should I go on? Just wait. Dekha jayenge. So this is the point. We have some assets for some time, and all those should be employed. In what way should we employ them? Iha yasya harekrishna karmanam manasa gira. Rupa Goswami says. Particularly, we can categorize these all into three: your body, your mind, and your words. These three, you have to use them. Even while you're living in an ordinary life, if we can do that, then we're called Jivan Mukta. Other places as well. Rishikena, Rishikesha Sevanam, Bhakti Ruchyate. So the intelligence is there also. We have to use it, but we have to ultimately, if we use it, then it will become purified enough that we recognize there's a limit to this intelligence. Spiritual intelligence has to come by mercy. Okay? Prabhuji had a question also.
Krishna Prabhu, you mentioned, thank you for the explanation of the expansion of the world. And you mentioned these categories, and two categories seem to be very similar, like how prakāśa and vilāsa-vigrahas.
Yes.
Because they are different, like externally. So what's the difference between them?
Well, I was talking about the prabhav and vaibhav because that's the subject of this passage. Later on, we're going to hear about the vilas and swamshas and other forms. Yeah, there seems to be a degree of overlap here actually in these different categories, because although the four-armed forms are considered to be vaibhava prakāśas, but Srila Prabhupada writes that in Dvārakā, the Lord's dealings with his 16,000 wives are performed in the prabhava prakāśa forms, which are only two-handed. So sometimes in Dvārakā and Mathura, the Lord manifests four hands, sometimes only two. And similarly in Vaikuṇṭha, he has four hands, but those are categorized in different ways. They're categorized under the Tarikatma subdivisions. So yeah, there's a little bit of overlap here. All this is discussed for those who are just burning with curiosity. Raise your hand if you're losing sleep about this. You should be. Maharaj Parikshit was. Arjun was in Bhagavad-Gita. Whatever he was not clear about, he was asking. So if you want to know more about this, I mentioned already, Madhya Lila chapter 20, and Lagu Bhagavatamritam especially, and Brihad Bhagavatamritam also, and Shat Sandarbhas, especially Krishna Sandarbha and Bhagavad Sandarbha. You'll find all the answers you wish to find there. That's where Prabhupada gets them from. Evam parampara praptam. Okay? One more here.
Maya is what it is not. We are in Maya. In Maya means this body is Maya. But Krishna is not in Maya, then you can understand how much he loves.
Yes. So that's the comment. Thank you. There's one more reference I can share with you, which I didn't have time to read, but it's very nicely, Prabhupada explains, very pithy manner, very succinct. Chapter 6 of the teachings of Lord Chaitanya, this summarizes Madhya Lila chapter 20, and all the things that we are discussing, very, very simple, Prabhupada puts it, in just a few pages. It's like CC for dummies. Okay. You had.
Harekrishna.
Yeah.
Even knowing the inconceivable potency can make one lazy to inquire, or make come to the point why to inquire, why to understand,
Yes.
why to ask questions. It's anyway inconceivable.
Right.
How do you overcome? Because it's encouraged one point that we inquire and service to serve the Guru.
Yes.
And another point we understand is inconceivable potency.
Did you come recently, or did you hear Panchagoda's question? Panchagoda asked a similar question. I mean, this is the point behind his question. That we have intelligence, what are we supposed to do with this intelligence? Yes, you have to use it, I said. Have to use it to its full capacity, but you also have to recognize that that capacity is not full. I mean, we're never going to have the capacity that Krishna has to understand things. That's just the way we're created. You have to eat that. I'm sorry to disappoint you. But the fact of the matter is that we, as a demonstration of devotion only, we have to take this God-given intelligence and utilize it for its purpose. When we do that, then God works through us, despite our shortcomings, despite our limited intelligence and limited everything, actually. So yeah, we have to use it. And yes, we should not be lazy, because that is the tendency. You know, we're always looking for two ways out of devotional service in this world. One is the bhoga route, where we just blow off Krishna entirely and try to be him, exploiting his energies. And the other one is the tyag route, where we try to just, evade Krishna's authority and somehow buck the system and overcome our karmas and be liberated even though we're not. So we have to avoid these tendencies. The lazy tendency is, I would say, a subset of the latter. Okay? Theek rahega? All right, thank you very much. All glories to Srila Prabhupada.